From the wind-brushed prairies to the echoing cell blocks of crumbling prisons, Nebraska hides its ghosts not in shadows but in silence. A silence that thickens after dark, when the sky swells with stars and the earth breathes old secrets. In this heartland of cornfields and quiet towns, strange stories have endured for generations, not as whispers but as warnings. These legends are not loud. They're not flashy. They linger like dust in the rafters, or a chill beneath your coat on a windless night. Rooted in real places, real people, and real pain, the tales of Nebraska straddle the line between fact and folklore. They are stories where history refuses to rest and something watches. Tonight we'll bring 12 of these stories back to life. But as you'll see, some things that go silent never truly go still. Legend 1. The Phantom Bride of Chadron State Park. They say she appears just before the fog rolls in, standing still at the edge of the cliffs, her veil rippling in wind that doesn't blow. The legend begins in the early 1900s, when Chadron State Park was still new and wild, its cabins few and its trails less traveled. A young couple came to honeymoon in the cool pines. The woman, dressed in white, was seen walking alone one evening, never to return. Searchers found her bridal shoes beside a rocky overlook, but no body, only a single torn scrap of silk tangled in a juniper branch below. Since then, visitors and rangers alike have reported sightings of a veiled woman in glowing white, drifting through the trees or hovering silently near the cliffs at twilight. One hiker in 1973 claimed she locked eyes with the figure before it faded into a mist that hadn't yet risen. In 1991, a camper awoke to the sound of soft crying outside his tent and found a damp footprint in the dust, smaller than a child's. Skeptics chalk it up to exhaustion, altitude, or imagination. But locals whisper the bride still walks, searching for her lost love, or perhaps trying to remember who she once was. Some say she was pushed, others believe she jumped, but no record of her name exists, as if the land itself has chosen to forget, or to hide. Today the legend endures. Newlyweds have left flowers on the cliffs. A trail camera once caught a flickering image, long dress, no face, and still no one lingers after sundown in that part of the park, because the veil may still blow in the wind, and the bride may still be waiting for someone to join her. Legend 2. The Screaming Jailhouse of Nebraska State Penitentiary. At the edge of Lincoln, behind high stone walls and rusted gates, stands a structure soaked in sorrow, the Nebraska State Penitentiary, a place where justice once thundered and mercy came quietly, if at all. But some nights when the moon is thin, and the halls are empty, something else is heard, a scream that does not belong to the living. The legend began in 1920, after the execution of Charles Starkweather's spiritual predecessor, a drifter hanged for a series of violent murders. He died cursing the warden, the state, and the ground beneath his feet. Within days, guards reported strange sounds from the cell blocks, whispers with no speaker, footsteps that never ended, and screams that erupted from empty rooms. The worst came from cell block D, where one prisoner swore he saw a man hanging from the rafters, turning slowly in midair, only for the figure to vanish when he called for help. In 1952, a chaplain fled the chapel mid-prayer, claiming an invisible hand gripped his shoulder and pressed him to his knees. He left the priesthood a month later. Reports persisted, cold spots, phantom chains clinking across concrete, shadows that moved against the light. Even in the 2000s, long after renovations and modern updates, staff avoided certain halls after dark. One maintenance worker claimed a door slammed shut behind him and locked itself. "I heard crying," he said, "but it was coming from under the floor." Some say the screams come from a hidden punishment room, long sealed and buried beneath newer construction. Others believe the penitentiary has soaked up so much pain and guilt that it breathes it back out. Tours are still given in parts of the old prison, but not in cell block D. That wing remains closed to the public, not because of safety, but because some things the state says are better left undisturbed. Yet if you stand outside the gates around midnight, you might hear it, a single echoing cry that shakes the very stone, a scream that doesn't want to be forgotten. Legend 3. The Walking Woman of Seven Sisters Road. Just outside Nebraska City, there's a stretch of gravel called Seven Sisters Road. It winds over 7 hills, each one with a story soaked in sorrow and shaded by trees that lean as if burdened by secrets. They say if you drive it late at night, you might see her alone, in white, walking where no one should walk. The legend dates back to the late 1800s. According to the oldest versions, a man consumed by rage or madness led his 7 sisters one by one to the tops of the hills, and there he hanged them from the trees. Some say he blamed them for a family disgrace. Others whisper of a curse, of voices he heard in the dark. What is certain is that 7 lives ended that night, and the land has never let it go. Drivers have reported headlights flickering, radios cutting out, and engines dying as they crest the 7th hill. One woman, in 1984, said her windshield fogged up suddenly and handprints appeared on the inside, small, pale, and cold. Another driver in 2006 picked up a hitchhiker in a white dress who said nothing, then vanished before they reached the next rise. The strangest tales speak of a figure walking beside your car in the rearview mirror, no matter how fast you drive. Skeptics claim the road's layout causes mechanical interference, or that local teens play pranks to keep the legend alive. But the soil on each hill has been tested, and the samples show abnormal levels of iron, as if the ground itself was disturbed or bled into. The county tried to rename it. Maps have marked it as L Street for decades, but no one calls it that. They still call it Seven Sisters, and some say the 7th still walks, searching for the others, or for justice, or simply for a way out. Legend 4. The Devil's Nest of Knox County. High above the Missouri River, tucked in a remote corner of Knox County, lies a stretch of land that refuses to be tamed. Locals call it the Devil's Nest, a jagged outcrop of cliffs, hills, and thickets where the wind howls wrong and compasses spin wild. And though the name may sound dramatic, those who know the land speak it in hushed tones. The origin of the legend reaches back to native tribes who called the place cursed, avoided even by the bravest warriors. They believed a dark spirit had settled there, feeding on the minds of those who ventured too close. Later settlers in the 1800s found bones scattered near the cliffs and tools rusted beyond recognition, as if abandoned mid-use. But it wasn't until the 1960s that the Devil's Nest gained wider notoriety. A developer attempted to build a resort on the site. Ski lifts, condos, roads, everything was in place until equipment began failing. Workers vanished for hours and returned confused, unable to say where they'd been. One man fell from a slope that wasn't steep. He survived, but said something had pushed him, cold and smiling. The project was abandoned. The buildings collapsed or were swallowed by the brush, and in their place, the legend grew. Teenagers dared each other to go camping there. Some returned pale and trembling. Others didn't return at all. In 1993, a pair of hikers were found wandering barefoot miles from their car, muttering about a face in the trees. Geologists tried to study the area, only to find their instruments glitching and their notes missing. One even left a memo: "This land doesn't want to be known." Today the Devil's Nest remains undeveloped. Hunters avoid it, GPS fails, cell phones die, but every so often the wind shifts and a low hum rises through the hills, like a whisper through gritted teeth. They say the devil doesn't live in cities. He waits in the wild, where man tries to shape the land, and the land shapes him back. Legend 5. The Haunted Tracks of Weeping Water. There's a place just south of Weeping Water, Nebraska, where the train no longer runs, but something still does. A place where steel has rusted, gravel has settled, and the wind carries the sound of something heavy approaching. The legend begins during the Great Depression. A freight train derailed on a cold, misty night near the limestone bluffs, killing several workers and 2 children who had wandered too close. Locals claimed the fog was too thick to see, the train too fast to stop. The wreckage was cleared, but whispers lingered. In the years that followed, people reported strange sightings near the abandoned tracks, glowing lanterns bobbing in the dark, distant whistles with no engine, and the unmistakable clatter of wheels on rails long removed. One farmer, in 1951, claimed he saw a child standing on the tracks, staring, motionless, only to vanish when he called out. In 1977, a couple walking their dog said the air suddenly grew dense and still. They turned to see lights behind them, low and white like a train's, but when they stepped aside, there was only silence and frost where their footprints should have been. Modern investigators blame infrasound or tricks of the fog, others suspect environmental factors. But to the townsfolk it's simpler. Those who died there are still traveling, never reaching their destination. Some believe the children search for their mother, who died days later from grief. Others think the train itself was cursed, rushed into service too soon, after a string of mechanical failures. Today the tracks are overgrown, yet untouched. No animals nest there, no plants thrive. A few locals still hear the whistle, usually at twilight, when the mist hugs the valley, and those who do, don't stick around to watch it pass. Legend 6. The Watcher on Hummel Hill. Lie above Omaha, where the trees of Hummel Park twist into strange shapes, and the ground itself seems to shift beneath your feet. There is said to be a presence ancient, unseen, but always near. They call it the Watcher, and though no one can say what it truly is, everyone agrees it sees you before you see it. The origins of the legend are tangled in a web of tragedies. In the 1930s, 2 bodies were found near the park's entrance, never identified, no arrests. In the 1950s, a child vanished from a picnic, only for her shoes to be found weeks later in a tree no child could reach. And always, there were the stairs counted by hundreds of visitors, never yielding the same number twice. But it was the Watcher that unsettled the most. People walking the trails alone spoke of a figure, tall and shadowed, standing perfectly still just beyond the trail line. No matter how fast they moved, it seemed to follow, never closer, never further. In 1988, a jogger reported seeing eyes like glass staring from a hollow tree. When he returned the next day with police, the tree was empty, but claw marks were gouged into the bark. On the inside, paranormal investigators have picked up EMF spikes, sudden temperature drops, and strange audio low static filled with what some describe as whispering. Others say the Watcher isn't a ghost or creature at all, but something older, something that was here before the land was parkland. Native Omaha tribes considered the area sacred and dangerous, a crossing point between the spirit world and our own. Locals have tried to dispel the stories, calling them urban legends, but hikers still go missing. Cameras glitch, dogs refuse to enter certain clearings, and always, there is the sense that something knows where you are, watches, waits, and if you stay too long might decide you're worth following home. Legend 7. The Devil's Chair of Alma. In a quiet cemetery near the small town of Alma, nestled among cracked tombstones and rusted gates, there sits an old stone chair, weathered by time, swallowed by weeds, but never empty for long. They call it the Devil's Chair, and those who sit in it don't always rise unchanged. The legend traces back to the early 1900s, when the chair was reportedly commissioned by a grieving family, a place to sit and speak to their dead. But it didn't take long for the stories to twist. Teenagers dared each other to sit in it at midnight, and those who did claimed to feel cold hands on their shoulders, whispers in their ears, or a sudden weight in their chests. One boy in 1946 laughed about the legend, until he returned home pale and silent. He refused to speak for 3 days. Some say the devil himself visits Alma once a year, to sit upon his throne and count the souls buried nearby. Others believe the chair is cursed, not by design, but by misuse. That sorrow turned to anger, and anger turned to something dark. One woman who lost a child sat in the chair every day for a year, praying for a sign. On the final day, the stone cracked, and she never returned. In the 1970s, attempts were made to remove the chair. The backhoe failed. The operator quit on the spot. Local authorities decided it was best left alone. To this day, the devil's chair remains. Visitors leave coins on the seat, offerings or perhaps bribes. Some bring flowers. A few bring their questions. But those who sit in silence, truly alone, in the dead of night, often report the same thing: a sudden warmth behind them, the brush of breath against the neck, and a voice that isn't their own, whispering. Legend 8. The Phantom Stagecoach of Dead Man's Hollow. Tucked along a forgotten stretch of the Oregon Trail near McCook, lies a ravine known to locals as Dead Man's Hollow, a place where wagon wheels once groaned, horses balked, and settlers prayed to reach the other side before dark. For in that narrow gorge, they say, something still rides a stagecoach black as midnight, pulled by horses that don't breathe. The first reports came from the 1860s, when travelers began describing a coach thundering through the hollow in the dead of night, appearing from nowhere and vanishing before it reached the bend. The coach never slowed, never turned, its windows dark, its driver faceless beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Those who tried to flag it down said it passed through them like smoke. Those who chased it never caught up. The legend ties back to a massacre, an ambushed coach carrying Union gold, shot down by outlaws who never found the treasure. All were killed when the cliffs collapsed above them, sealing the gorge in rock and rumor. The stagecoach, they say, was buried with its cargo, and now rides endlessly in search of a road that no longer exists. Over the years, sightings have continued. A farmer in 1923 claimed to hear wheels grinding on dry stone despite no visible road. In 1974, a Boy Scout troop fled their camp after a coach light passed silently through the trees, no sound of hooves, just wind and the smell of gunpowder. And in 2008, a paranormal team set up thermal cameras near the hollow. One recorded a heat signature, rectangular and fast-moving, with no source. Skeptics call it atmospheric pressure, optical illusion. Locals nod and say, then explain the tracks that vanish in hard clay. Even the animals avoid the hollow. Coyotes go around, birds fly over. The phantom stagecoach doesn't come for you, it comes through you. A ghost of greed and violence that never found its peace. And every so often, when the air is dry and the moon rides high, it rolls again, chasing a horizon that no longer waits. Legend 9. The Ghost of Antelope Park Bridge. In the heart of Lincoln, amid the laughter of children and the hum of city life, stands a bridge that feels somehow out of place. It crosses a gentle creek in Antelope Park, a modest span of concrete and iron. But beneath its shadow, something waits. Something with a story soaked in heartbreak and rain. The tale begins in the 1920s, when the bridge was newer and the park was still expanding. A young woman jilted at the altar, or so they say, walked to the bridge in her wedding gown, stood for hours in the drizzle, and then leapt. Her name, like so many others, is lost to time, but her presence never left. By the 1950s, teenagers told stories of the lady in the mist. Appearing in moonlight, her veil trailing behind her, she would drift across the bridge or stand motionless at its center, only to vanish if anyone approached. Park maintenance crews reported finding wet footprints leading onto the bridge, but none leaving. Others claimed to see a white shape in the water that never surfaced, never moved. A local police officer in 1971 responded to a call about a woman in distress. He arrived to see her standing at the railing. He shouted. She jumped. He ran, only to find nothing in the stream below, not a rip, not a sound. He never filed a report, but he never forgot her. Even today, park-goers report cold spots on warm days and the eerie sound of a woman humming beneath the bridge. Some say you'll see her reflection in the water, even if she isn't there. Others believe she waits for someone to say her name, to remember her truth, so she can finally cross. City officials say it's nothing, just an old story. But they still paint the bridge every few years, covering the same thin handprint that always seems to reappear just above the railing. Legend 10. The Wendigo of the Sandhills. Out in Nebraska's Sandhills, where grass ripples like water and silence stretches for miles, There are stories older than the plains themselves. Among them, none is whispered more fearfully than the tale of the Wendigo, a creature of hunger, winter and madness that stalks the remote hills in the dead of night. This legend didn't begin with Nebraska settlers, but with the indigenous peoples of the region. The Lakota and Pawnee warned of a spirit that devours the soul and flesh of men, one born when a human, consumed by desperation, turns to cannibalism or cruelty. The Wendigo, they said, was not just a monster, it was a punishment. The sandhills, with their shifting dunes and wind-swept isolation, became fertile ground for such a tale. During the brutal blizzard of 1888, a small ranch family vanished without explanation. Days later, rescuers found their homestead abandoned, the fire still burning, food untouched, and claw marks gouged into the inside of the walls. In 1931, a drifter was found near Thetford barefoot and frostbit. He rambled about a tall man with no lips and eyes like glass, who walked without leaving tracks. Locals dismissed it as exposure, until the man disappeared from the town hospital that same night, his sheets torn to ribbons. More recently, ranchers have reported cattle mutilations without blood, strange howls across the hills, and enormous tracks barefoot in snow, 20 miles from the nearest road. One park ranger in 1998 swore he saw something watching him from atop a dune, emaciated, hairless and too tall. Its ribs moved when it breathed, he said, like it was starving, but smiling. Skeptics call it legend mixed with prairie madness, but some say you can still smell it in the air before it comes, like meat gone wrong, like a fire that won't warm. And if you ever feel eyes on your back in the sandhills, don't turn around, that's how it finds you. Legend 11, the Cursed Doll of Hastings Museum. Within the polished glass cases and echoing halls of the Hastings Museum lies an artifact that draws more than curious eyes. It's a child's doll, Victorian in style, porcelain face cracked with age, dressed in yellowed lace. To most it's just a relic, but to those who know, it's the doll that moves when no one's watching. The story begins in the 1940s when the doll was donated anonymously. No history, no paperwork, just a box and a note that read, "Do not open after dark." Museum staff dismissed it as a prank, and added the doll to the children's display on the third floor. Then strange things began. At night, janitors reported finding the doll in different positions, once turned completely around, another time lying face down, though the case was locked. Security footage failed to record anything. In 1965, a curator claimed the doll's eyes followed him as he moved. He resigned weeks later after suffering a nervous breakdown. By the 1980s, the legend had taken hold. A group of schoolchildren swore they saw the doll blink. A woman fainted while taking a photo, insisting the doll smiled at her. The photo came out blurred and discolored, only the doll's outline sharp. Attempts to move it failed. One staffer dropped the doll and suffered a fractured wrist before it hit the ground. Another tried to relocate the display and found all the lights in the museum shorted out as he reached for the glass. Experts offered explanations: temperature shifts, lighting illusions, collective suggestion. But the museum quietly built a custom case, airtight, UV shielded and never opened. Still, visitors leave notes near the glass: "Thank you for letting me look," or "I didn't mean to stare." Some even bring offerings: dried flowers, small coins or bits of lace, because legend says if you offend the doll, it doesn't stay behind the glass. Legend 12. The Shadow Children of Blackbird Hill. Along the Missouri River bluffs, just north of Decatur, stands a hill named for Chief Blackbird, a fierce Omaha leader who demanded to be buried upright facing the land he ruled. Today, a monument marks his resting place, but it's not the chief who unsettles those who visit. It's the children, the ones no one can name. The legend speaks of an orphanage built near Blackbird Hill in the early 1900s. A small, bleak structure that housed children whose parents vanished in the wild frontier. Underfunded and forgotten, the orphanage operated in near secrecy until a fire consumed it one winter night. No rescue came, No names were recorded. Only ashes and silence remained. Years passed. Trees grew. Roads shifted. But stories began to spread. Campers and hikers told of children laughing where no one played. Small footprints in the dirt, leading nowhere. A woman walking her dog in 1972 claimed she saw 5 children standing in a circle near the monument. When she called out, they turned faces pale, hollow-eyed, then disappeared into the mist. In 1990, a group of teens held a séance on the hill as a prank. One ran screaming into the night, mumbling about tiny hands pulling at my coat. He never spoke of it again. Locals have tried to dismiss the legend as an echo of grief, but trail cameras have caught motion in empty fields. Visitors report toys going missing, a harmonica heard playing at dusk, and always the same cold spot, just to the right of the chief's monument, where no grass grows and the air feels heavy. Some believe the children are looking for the home they lost. Others say they're drawn to Blackbird's grave, seeking protection from a world that abandoned them. And a few fear they're not lost at all, merely watching. So if you visit Blackbird Hill and you feel small fingers brush your hand or hear a giggle just behind you, don't run. They've waited too long to be seen.